Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Dr. Christina Greer, Associate Professor at Fordham University, Politics Editor at the Grio, and the host of What's in It for Us podcast. As we all know, but I'll remind you, millions of families in this country are struggling to put food on the table, let alone enjoy a meal out every once in a while. More than 4 in 10 children live in a household without enough money to meet basic expenses. When Congress and President Biden passed the American Rescue Plan, they did something that can transform these families' lives. For 1 year, they expanded the child tax credit and earned income tax credit, making it fully refundable and removing work requirements. Many reports show that these changes could cut child poverty in half and give a boost to millions of middle-income families as well. The potential impact is even greater for Black and Brown kids. But what happens after 1 year? Who will have access to these benefits and who was left behind? For the next hour, we'll hear from leaders in Congress, leaders from the grassroots, leading scholars, and leading policy experts. What would it mean for families to make this policy permanent and far more inclusive? Today's event is called Credit Where Credit is Due, and we're going to talk all things tax credits, or as I like to say, cash in your pocket. That's your money, your tax dollars coming back to you. But first, let me give some other credit where credit is due. The Grio is proud to co-host today's event with Community Change Action and our co-sponsor, Economic Security Project. Community Change Action, a national organization that builds power of low-income people of color to fight for a society where everyone can thrive. They've launched a campaign with grassroots organizing partners and allies in DC to win permanent changes to the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, the CTC and the EITC, for those of you who might not know the alphabet soup of what those letters stand for. These credits put cash in people's pockets after they file their taxes. They help families buy the things they need, pay their rent, buy enough food to eat, pay student loans, and afford just to get by. Or like I know in the case of Dorian, pay for diapers for his baby. Throughout today's program, we'll be sharing more information about how you can get involved with Community Change Action's campaign. But first, you'll hear from Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio. We'll talk about why he is helping lead efforts in Congress to permanently expand the CTC and the EITC. Senator Brown, welcome. He's represented the state of Ohio in the United States Senate since 2006 and served as representative for Ohio's 13th congressional district for 14 years before that. A long-time Senator Brown was a key figure in securing language in President Biden's American Rescue Plan to expand the CTC and the EITC. And it's worth noting that he's not new to this fight, having advocated for expanded tax credits for years. In 2019, he led a group of 46 Democrats in introducing the Working Families Tax Relief Act, which would have expanded credits for working families while also addressing critical gaps in access to debt. Welcome, Senator Brown.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greer. I really appreciate the chance to be here. Dr. Greer, Dorian, Warren, thank you for your work with Community Change. Representative Jeffries has joined us. He's a great progressive voice and force in the House in Ohio. And Prentice Haney, thank you for being part of this. These expansions of child tax credit and earned income tax credit, frankly, these wins, these expansions were one of the biggest victories working families have had for decades. We need to make them permanent. This can't be a temporary tax cut when we know the status quo wasn't working for so many families. Dr. Greer pointed out what this meant, the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit expansion, and to make it permanent. We did a little dignity of work interview with my committee the new committee I chair, a banking and housing committee. And one woman said, the words working and poor should not be in the same sentence. We know that even before this pandemic, hard work wasn't paying off for millions of workers. Wages, we've seen executive compensation skyrocket. We've seen profits go up. We see workers more and more productive, yet wages have been flat for decades while the cost of everything is up, particularly the cost of raising children. From childcare to health insurance to transportation to putting money away for college, a hard day's work doesn't begin to cover the expenses for millions of workers. Even middle-class families don't feel stable. That's why these tax cuts are so popular. It's why they make so much sense. Americans have spent years watching politicians in Washington hand out tax cuts to corporations and the wealthiest tiny sliver of this country. These tax cuts help everybody else. In my state, 92% of children are eligible. 92% of Ohio kids' families are getting this tax credit. That $3,000 or that $3,600 if the children are under 6 is going to make a big difference. $250 or $300 check every single month. A big difference for families paying for daycare and diapers and school supplies and all the extra expenses that come up when you have children. And those expenses aren't going away in 5 years. We need to show these workers and families that we'll be on their side, not only during this pandemic, but always, permanently. We know what always happens whenever we pass something that gives people a little bit more economic security. The conservative corporate elite always come after it. They spent decades trying to cut Medicare, trying to stop Medicaid expansion, going after Social Security, dismantling Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. We need to make sure this tax cut for working families, we have to make sure that this tax cut is permanent. We have to stand up to these attacks. That's why we need all of you to be the advocates. I know that community that Dr. Grier is. And I'll close with this little story. We've established a tradition in the Senate. Once a year, every spring, I gather 6 senators, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and we read on the Senate floor Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail in 1963. And all of you have read it, I'm sure, on this call. But I challenge all of you to read it again. I'd read it as a young man. I'd read it maybe once more, and I've read it again recently a number of times. But we go to the floor and read this letter. And the part of the letter that I like the most, especially talking to advocates, is when Dr. King said, progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. Progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It happens because groups like Community Change and Dr. Greer and Mr. Haney and all of you step up, Congressman Jeffries, all of you step up and push your elected officials to do the right thing. So thank you for your advocacy. When you love this country, you fight for the people who make it work. That's what all of you are doing. I'm grateful we can win this fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Brown. I wish we could clone you. Now I want to bring on some often unheard voices into this conversation, and I apologize for the noise in the background. I live in Brooklyn, not in Hakeem Jeffries' district, but right next door. But I want to bring on some folks to the conversation, including folks who will directly benefit from these policies, along with movement leaders from New York and Ohio, to talk about the political movement on the ground right now to make these expanded benefits permanent. So first, I'd like to bring on Alexandra Sanwan, who's the Long Island and Westchester Health Coordinator at Make the Road New York. Alexandra joined Make the Road New York first as a member of the organization in May 2011. Then she started as a health advocate in the Long Island office in February of 2012. For the past 10 years, Alexandra has been providing one-on-one services, helping individuals apply for all forms of health insurance and navigate the health system. Alexandra is also an immigrant from Colombia. Next, we have Prentice Haney. Prentice Haney is co-executive director of the OOC, the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. He's a veteran community organizer and strategist whose work has been featured in The Guardian, MSNBC, The Daily Beast, and Blavity. In 2019, Prentice stepped into leadership at the OOC after previously serving as the executive director of the Ohio Student Association. Saeda Shabazz is a mother who will be receiving the credit. She's a Community Change Communications Fellow and a freelance writer who writes about race, sexuality, poverty, and the intersections with parenting. She has written for multiple publications, including the New York Times, and is a staff writer for Scary Mommy. Saeda lives in Los Angeles with her partner, sons, and their pets. And last but certainly not least, Dorian Warren, co-president of Community Change Action and co-founder of the Economic Security Project. Dorian is a progressive scholar, organizer, and media personality. He's worked to advance racial and economic justice for over 2 decades, and throughout his career, he's advocated for direct cash support as a way to build economic power for all Americans. I'd like to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for being here today. Dorian, I'll let you start off.
Thanks so much, Christina, Dr. Greer, and thanks to all of my co-panelists. I just want to take 30 seconds to thank the Grio for hosting this really important conversation. Thanks also to the Economic Security Project Action for co-sponsoring, and thanks to Senator Brown for leading this fight with a few of our other champions in Congress. And I just want to say, I'm really excited to be talking about this today and feeding off the momentum of the moment, because we know starting today, House Democrats are leading a Child Tax Credit Week of Action. And this event is a part of that. This is our grassroots Credit Where Credit Is Due campaign. And we like to think it's heating up across the country. And the power that's building around this incredible economic opportunity for our families is just palpable. It's in the air. So with that, I'll toss back to you, Dr. Grier.
Thank you so much, Dorian. And I should say that I'm a proud member of Community Change, proud board member of Community Change, and I'm so thankful for the work that you do, Dorian. Prentice, I wanted to start with you, please. You just heard Senator Brown, your senator, talk about the political climate and what he's doing to move the conversation to make these benefits permanent and more inclusive. And he also had some thoughts on what influence the grassroots, especially people directly affected by these policies, could yield here. What are your reactions to what he said?
Thank you. Well, first off, we really appreciate the leadership of Senator Brown on this issue. And some of the things that I really love about what Senator Brown and grassroots leaders have talked about for years is the concept of dignity of work. But oftentimes, when we talk about dignity of work, we think just about the workplace. But part of what we're talking about today is not just the workplace, but our household. Our households. There's so many folks in our families who are taking care of our families and caring for our loved ones, no matter what we look like or where we come from. And so this concept of fighting for the CTC and the EITC and making it permanent is actually about bringing dignity to our household with the work that so many women of color do to take care of our families. The OOC, which was started over a decade ago, was really started by women, young women of color, who were fighting for economic justice in a state that was in economic downturn. And when we started our fight, we started first fighting for workers. Through making sure that we could fight for collective bargaining in Senate Bill 5 in that fight in 2011. And since then, our constituencies of women of color in the caregiving economy, our formerly incarcerated folks, our students, our people of faith have been fighting for Ohio. And I'm so proud to be working with Community Change on this issue and fighting to make the CTC and EITC permanent.
Thank you so much. Saeda, I want to bring you in because you're someone who will benefit directly from these tax benefits. Can you share a little bit about what these tax credits will mean for you and your family?
Well, I have a son who is 7, and, just raising a 7-year-old is expensive. He's almost 8 now. He's going into 2nd grade. There's just a lot of things that he needs. He's constantly needing new shoes, new school uniforms. He eats me out of house and home on a daily basis. So having this extra money every month will alleviate some of the pressure that we are facing day to day, and making sure that he has what he needs. If I need to get him a new pair of shoes because he's worn holes in the other ones, that it's taken care of and it's done. If he needs extra snacks, which is always the case, I can have that and not have to rebudget things. If, my partner and I are both freelancers, and say if we have a slow month, not having to worry about having the extra money just to make sure that the, electric bill is paid, or that the power is paid, or that the internet is paid, because we can't work if we don't have internet. It helps. Like, all of these little things help us to alleviate the day-to-day pressures that any parent is going through financially, but especially when we live in a really expensive city. Like, having extra money will hopefully help us move into a new apartment, have a little bit more room for a growing kid and a growing family. So it's just a lot of alleviating the pressure of the day to day for us.
Absolutely. And I want to stick with you, Saeda, because one of the big changes policymakers made to the CTC and the rescue plan is that families will get the full amount, even if they don't have any quote unquote earned income. And Congress basically ended for 1 year the work requirement. So historically, and this is something Prentice alluded to, Black women were the targets of the welfare queen narrative that prevented this change in the past. Do you think we're at a turning point where we're winning against the racist and sexist narratives and undoing some of these punitive work requirements in our social policies?
Well, I sure hope so. It would be nice, wouldn't it, after all these years, if we were moving past those narratives. I think it might be still a little bit early to say 100% that that's what it is, but it definitely seems that way. and we are, we're moving in a positive direction. Not having to ending the work requirement is incredibly helpful, especially because so many women and women of color, Black women more especially, are working in caregiving. And that is a thankless and often incomeless job to be in. We don't get the credit for caring for our families. And that's what most of us are doing. We're caring, if not, excuse me, for children, for elders, for elderly parents, for neighbors and relatives. And it's about time that work is being recognized as something that is still worthy of income. And so, yes, I hope that we are moving past this narrative of Black women, especially, abusing the system to sit at home and do nothing, which has never been the case. We're always out there in the streets taking care of our communities and taking care of our families.
Thank you so much. Alexandra, I want to bring you in because in New York, 3.5 million children will benefit from CTC expansion, and nearly 1 million adults will benefit from the EITC expansion. But undocumented immigrants are not included. In 2017, the Trump administration and members of the GOP rescinded CTC and EITC benefits for millions of immigrants, and this exclusion wasn't addressed in the recent expansion. So can you explain what it's like right now for undocumented immigrant families to go through this pandemic without access to the cash payments and other relief measures that were passed in Biden's plans? And we know that everyone is struggling right now, but how is that experience different compared to families who do qualify for relief?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a Latinx immigrant, single mother, woman coming from Colombia. I came here with 2 children as an undocumented person, and I have to work really hard to live, to support my family. And even I used to pay my taxes, and every year file income tax. I was not entitled to the same benefits that the other people. Working one-on-one with my community every day, I see this story repeat all the time. Immigrants are particularly vulnerable to the economic fallout by the pandemic and have no direct access to the billions of dollars in federal pandemic relief over the past year. Like an estimated of 4 in 5 work essential jobs that put them at high risk to contract the COVID virus. Around 400 undocumented adults lack access to health insurance, and many go without access to care due to fear of the high medical debt and with no ability to pay, which means they forgo medical care. Like many Americans, they are struggling to put food on the table for their families, and many see themselves forced to work jobs for much lower pay because of the desperate state caused by the lack of access to relief measures, such as unemployment or stimulus payments. Also, it's a lot of fear due to misinformation or distrust in the systems, language barrier, or lack of proper documentation. Also leads to underutilization of certain protections and rights. For example, the eviction moratorium, because of the fear that reaching out for help or reporting landlords could lead to deportation or detention, they don't take those rights. They don't use their tenant protections. Even though the COVID vaccines are available to everyone, no matter their citizenship, our immigrant community, because maybe a lack of cultural competent vaccination information or misinformation, they're unwilling to come forward early in the vaccination rollout. It's about the need of ensuring that all families have economic stability to not only survive, but to get through this pandemic that all of us are impacted by. But the experience for undocumented immigrants is worse, because when you don't have access to all the help and relief that other people have, the impact is completely negative and creates a lot of frustration and fear.
So I want to stick with you because, Alexandra, your organization doesn't just organize immigrants. Make the Road New York is organizing across race. And so can you share with us what people think when Congress creates benefits but excludes people based on their identity?
Yes, definitely. is devised and doesn't make sense. Stopping this practice of deciding who is in and who is out based on the race or immigration status will help defeat the politics of division and help bring out different communities together. All our families need the same themes, independent the race, immigration status. We all need the same.
Right. Dorian, did you want to jump in
Yeah, I
really
wanted to jump
quickly?
in just to make 2 quick points here. And one is, it's one thing, and particularly in the last year of the pandemic, and particularly in New York, where folks would clap, right, every day at 7 o'clock to honor essential workers. So that's great. That's also symbolic. And so we actually have to make support count. And so for all those essential workers, disproportionately immigrant, disproportionately undocumented, they have to be in. They pay taxes. They got to be in. No more exclusion. The second point I want to make, Dr. Grier, is that, look, I'll just be frank, as a Black man in this country, I know a little something, you know a little something about exclusion, particularly from New Deal policies that were very clear about excluding domestic workers and agricultural workers. And the goal was for Jim Crow Southern senators to exclude Black people, Black women, Black men. So we have to stand up and say no more exclusion. So at Community Change Action, along with our friends in the Firm Action Network, we will be fighting to ensure that immigrants are included going forward.
Thank you. I mean, we know we're still feeling those effects of that exclusion and the transference of wealth some 100 years later. Prentice, I wanted to bring you back in here because the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities estimates that in your state, nearly 2.4 million kids will benefit from CTC expansion in the American Rescue Plan. 690,000 childless adults will benefit from the EITC expansion. Can you tell us how this is being received right now, knowing the money hasn't started flowing yet, but your members and what does, by your members, and what does the public education work on this look like? And what does the work to connect people to these benefits to ensure they receive cash in their pockets look like?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of energy on the ground. As Senator Brown said earlier, 92% of children in Ohio are eligible. That is virtually all of our membership. All the cliff affected parents, all of the child care providers, the caregivers that we're organizing, they're all impacted. They all could benefit from this. And so we have a engaged and ready in a base that is ready to move. I heard a story from a member just a couple of days ago. This is just why it's so important. Saeda said it earlier around incomeless jobs. You know, that the work of caregiving is about incomeless jobs. And so we had one of our worker members was working at a healthcare facility, and there was a lot of women of color gathering around talking about the child tax credit, even before we got to our membership meeting, just in the workplace. And part of the reason why they found out is like, I know because I need to figure out how I'm gonna buy these Pampers later. I'm glad I got this, and I'm gonna figure out how I'm gonna get this so to pay for this tuition for this school, or get this new tire for our car, And so what we starting to see in our membership, but even broader than our membership, is that women of color know this is coming. They know how much it means, and they know how much work they put in, and they're ready to already put that money back in because they understand in their bones what it means to take care of a family and what it means to have the resources to take care of yourself so you can take care of a family. And so I think right now, this is the moment to hit while the iron is hot. And so I'm so glad that in Ohio, we have Senator Sherrod Brown, who's a champion of this issue of making it permanent. We are in conversations with Chairwoman Joyce Beatty of the Congressional Black Caucus, who will also be a champion of this. And we are ready to make sure that our Ohio delegation sees the impact of this and continues to fight for its permanence. And I would even go to say that some of our members are excited not only about this passing in Ohio and getting this benefit, but also about the possibility of state-based child tax credit programs. What could it look like for our members to fight for something like that in their own home turf? And so I just think that, we have to fight right now and make sure that it doesn't disappear. We have an opportunity over the next couple months to really show the impact of this and make sure that our members are at the center of telling their stories about what they can do with this income that they deserve. And we can make sure we get this done before the end of the year.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Great.
Yes.
Dorian, thank you, Prentice. Dorian, did you want to just add a little something? I'm thinking about some of the work that you all are doing at Community Change. I wanted to know if you wanted to just follow up with what Prentice just laid out for us.
Yeah, just one quick note. I was just thinking, Princess, as you were talking, to anticipate some of the counter arguments we're going to hear. And so there's the noise is starting, right? So folks are saying, oh, what about the deficit? Because that's always the opposition. That's the argument they always bring up, right? So we're hearing this from the chattering class, from some policymakers, and the deficit should absolutely not be a concern right now in this moment. We can't afford to spend what we need to spend to ensure families have a solid economic foundation on which to build our lives. And I'll add that unpaid work that women do, let's talk about that. There's unpaid work that women do. It creates $1.5 trillion each year that, frankly, big business and the wealthiest among us capture that money, capture that value that the rest of us produce. So the cost of an expanded, robust child tax credit and earned income tax credit doesn't even come close to offsetting the economic value that women create for free in this society and always have. We could have a whole conversation about the history of human society, but I'm talking about at least since 1619 in this country. I think of the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit. It's a down payment on what is owed women who've been doing unfree labor for a long time. Sorry,
well, at least
but thank you.
Yes, no, and I think that we should make sure that we have another panel to talk about just that at some point in time, and the historical underpinning of the work that you all still have to do to undo all of those centuries of women being excluded. Prentice, I wanted to just follow up with you just for a moment, because we heard earlier from Saeda about the racist and sexist narratives of the past that have been used to drive this wedge between families. Now, do you see an opportunity for Ohio Organizing Collaborative to build a multiracial movement around this demand?
Absolutely. I mean, there are certain politicians and greedy corporations who are trying to tell us that there is not enough for us. There's not enough for Black women. There's not enough for our communities. There's not enough to care for our communities. And that is simply not true. And what's so shocking about it is that when we use division and race baiting, we start to forget that women who are living in rural areas in Ohio are experiencing the same sort of childcare issues and income issues as women who are living in East Cleveland. And when we start getting those women in the same room, talking to each other about the power they can build together, they start to see that the only thing dividing them is 20 miles of road, is stories about who those women are. But when they get together, this is what we do in the OC. While we center women of color and we build the power of women of color who are caregivers, because we know that when we actually, create universal systems that also target root causes of people's deprivation, that we bring everybody up. While we're focusing on women of color, we're intentionally building a multiracial movement because we know that is actually how we deliver the wins we need in our state and in our nation. And women of color are so critical and vital because they've been left out of the conversation. They are the folks who are fighting day in and day out to make sure not only our families are being raised, but that we are having income that can keep our house open, and also fighting the good fight. And so we need to make sure we honor their leadership in labor and put them at the center of the fight, even when we're in the middle of universal programs. And so I think right now, the biggest opportunity is that if we can win improvements that include undocumented immigrants, and making sure that we are not allowing this sort of race baiting and
Uh-oh.
divide us. Oh, can you hear me?
You went out just for a little bit on my end, but you're back.
Listen, they're trying to take me out now because I'm talking about it. I said that we just need to make sure that at this moment, what a multiracial movement looks like doesn't mean that we actually forget about race. It means that we center race. It means that we talk about race explicitly and about how race actually allows us to get talking about race and fixing the issue around race allows us to fix economic issues in our country. And that's why we are building multiracial movements, not because we feel like we've messed up, or we're trying to I don't know what the word is at the moment. But the thing is, it's actually the power move. How we build power is actually through multiracial movements. How we build power is by centering women of color. That's the only path if our country actually wants to create a system that works for all of us.
Wow. Thank you, Prentice. And so, Saeda, I want to end with you because building on what Prentice has just laid out, movements around income support and the safety net in the United States have largely been led by low-income mothers. And so as a mother, you often write about parenting and politics. What would you say to the parents out there to get them involved in this fight that Prentice and Alexandra have laid out?
Well, first of all, you have to file your taxes. We have until May 17th this year to do it. So you still have about a week left if you haven't already. That is step number one. The more of us who file our taxes and get those credits, they'll start to listen. They'll see, oh, people are actually using this and they're not pretending it does, they're not unaware. Bodies and numbers are where they're going to show people that we mean business and that we are serious about fighting for what is ours in this country. And like Prentice is saying, we have to come together. We have to reach out to our friends, to other people who may have skin in the game, talk to the parents at your kid's school if you can, talk to your kids' schools if you have children in school, talk to the caregivers at their daycare, talk to the people that have a hand in creating the safety nets for us to be able to create income to even pay taxes in the first place. Make sure we're not leaving anyone out of the conversation. Think about what these things would do to benefit all of our lives. We always think about ourselves, but sometimes we have to think a little bit broader and think about those outside of our immediate world. But even in your immediate world, make sure all of your family members with children know that this money is out there. It's incredibly important to take advantage of everything that we have at our fingertips, because that's the only way that going forward, this government is going to know that we're serious. We have to stop letting them tell us what we're going to do, and we need to start telling them what they're going to do.
I love that. And I do love reminding people to file their taxes May 17th. Well, I want to thank you, Prentice and Alexandra, for sharing the stage with us and sharing your really important stories and the work you're doing to improve the lives of millions of people. So thank you, Saeda. Thank you, Prentice. And thank you, Alexandra. Now, Dorian, I want to bring in the president of the Insight Center, Ann Price, whose tireless work has brought the issue of the racial wealth gap into mainstream consciousness. So welcome, Ann. How are you?
Great. Great to be with you today.
Fantastic. Dorian, I'm going to start with you. The Congress members and grassroots leaders just gave us some context from the kind of impact this could have and what we need to do on the ground. But help us put this in historical context. Community Change worked on a campaign 20 years ago to expand the CTC and the EITC.
Thanks, Chrissy. And hey, Ann, it's great to see you. And I'm going to be really brief because I want to get Ann in the conversation. I want to hear all her words. So listen, 3 quick points. First is that it's been a very long time since we've had an opportunity like this to greatly improve material well-being for tens of millions of people and to shift power to workers and families, particularly to Black and brown families and women. So that's point one. Point two, to your question, Dr. Grier, 20 years ago, Community Change led a national campaign that, with many, many others, actually won a partially refundable child tax credit. So this fight is in many ways in our DNA. It's important for our grassroots partners around the country. And point three, because I know, Chrissy, you and I are big fans of New Georgia Project and Stacey Abrams, I just want to remind people that in terms of the power building and the ability to recruit more people to our movement, what New Georgia Project pioneered in 2013, 2014, 2015 was signing up Georgians for the Affordable Care Act, making sure people got health care. And along the way, guess what they did? They registered people to vote, they held on to them, they kept in touch, they informed them so that over many, many years, we could then see the results in November and January of that work. And that's a great example of using a transformative policy to build long-term power and to recruit more people into the movement.
That's fascinating. And I want to bring you in. And I want you to put this political moment into context for us, because this isn't the first time Congress has battled over how much to provide families in terms of a safety net, who gets the benefits and who gets left behind. So what has helped shift ideas about a bigger and more inclusive CTC and EITC into the mainstream?
Yeah, thank you for that. Let's think about this and put it in a kind of historical political moment. Look, last year, 20 million Americans were not working, were unemployed. And this figure dwarfs what we saw even in the Great Depression, where upwards of around 13 million people were not working. So we've seen this real crisis in terms of people working. And I think this could be our NERA moment. And by that, I mean the National Industrial Recovery Act, which really created the conditions for modern labor movements that we're seeing today. It helped organize 1.5 million workers in just 5 months and really built the middle class as we see it today. You know, I think we're really seeing a shift in bold ideas, especially around cash, right? Senator Warnock and Ossoff, talking about Georgia, really ran on this promise of direct cash payments, right? And we're seeing that government and a push for government to play a bigger role in putting cash in the hands of families who need it the most. So we have a real opportunity here. And we know that cash works. We're seeing that it works. It's worked during the pandemic because it's giving families the agency to make decisions that they need to make for their families, to take care of their families in the way that they see best, right? So when you look at the scale and urgency with an openness around these bold ideas, it really creates an opening for something truly transformational, right? And I think the question we have to ask is, what do we do with this moment, right? What do we do with this moment that's going to determine the arc of economic justice for the next 20 or 30 years? We already know who gets benefits, and we already know who's left behind. And the only way we're going to push through this is by centering racial, gender, and immigrant justice, right? They're completely inseparable. And, you know, the reality is this. There's no guarantees that we'll make these permanent. But if history teaches us one thing, we know this. We know a racist and sexist backlash is going to happen. We've seen it so many times. And as Alexandra just pointed out, the markers are already there in the way that the American Rescue Plan leaves out so many immigrants. Our history is that we've had politicians use racist and xenophobic zero-sum narratives of scarcity, right, to pit us against one another and to put us in competition, particularly immigrants and other working families. So we know this playbook, we know what we're up against, and the way we're going to move through this and deliver on key pillars of a care economy is to really work in a multiracial, multi-ethnic, building solidarity across many groups to get us to where we need to go. That's going to be our North Star in making it through this.
Well, I want to sort of follow up because, you know, others have spoken to this point, but I want you to reflect on what it means to and why it's important to center Blackness in this fight to improve upon and make permanent the changes to these tax credits.
Yeah, you know, when you think about what we've seen over the past 7 decades since the New Deal, right? That anti-Blackness is a fundamental harm that permeates our systems, our structures, our institutions, and particularly our anti-poverty policies, right? You can't divorce narratives, and Prentice talked about this. You can't divorce narratives around cheats of the system, and laziness as it pertains to work from Blackness. You know, when we hear those terms, it engenders an immediate imagery of Blackness, right? And this is a key driver to why we are being held back from passing the kind of policies that will help all working Americans, right? Let's think about this, for example. When it comes to the IRS auditing people, EITC recipients are audited almost at the same rate as the richest Americans, right? Think about that, right? That they are audited almost at the same rate as the richest Americans. And where does that happen, right? The rates of the highest auditing by the IRS for people who get EITC happens mainly in the rural South, in predominantly Black counties. Those are the 5 highest counties where this auditing happens are predominantly Black. And where does it happen least? Vermont, Wisconsin, right? So we have to understand that anti-Blackness harms us all because it ensnares everyone in which these policies are built. And it inhibits the building of humane systems. And that just doesn't just impact Black people, it impacts all of us. So centering Blackness is not just about tearing something down, right? It's not just about addressing this fundamental harm. It's about building something up and understanding that we all hold multiple identities. And when we think about the way that we can understand Blackness as it pertains to gender, class, nationality, sexuality, immigration status, or even disability, we can see the lens of Blackness, right? We can see that harm permeates all of us because Black folks are Indigenous, Black folks are queer, Black folks are disabled, right? And so it's a lens in which we can actually start to think about how do we use the Black experience as a marker, as a North Star, in a way to rebuild humane systems.
Wow, I need to just like process that for a moment. Dorian, you spend way more time with Ann, so you're used to sort of the mind-blowing, mic dropping Ann Price. But as a movement building organization, taking what Ann has laid out for us, what excites you most about this moment?
Yeah, there's so much there. And I wanted to say amen to Ann's comments because she just took us to church for a minute. So, yeah, I
was like, I'm in a state right now. Process.
Keep going. I got to process all those words because Ann said all the words. So I just want to quickly, a couple points here, Chrissy. So one is when I think about those places and those people who have been disinvested in for decades, and I'm talking about particularly Black communities, this goes some distance, not the full distance, but it's a start in terms of repairing some of the harm around those decades of disinvestment. So this is in some ways partly about reinvestment in those communities that have been left out for decades. It is about, so that's about racial justice, let's be really clear. It's about gender justice as well. And so we already made the point earlier about the $1.5 trillion a year that women actually produce in terms of unpaid labor. That's an Oxfam study, which we often don't talk about. So there's a racial justice dimension, there's a gender justice dimension. And I do think, and Ann is a big part of this, there is, in the last, say, decade or so, been a reimagining of what we consider our safety net. There's, as you know, lots of guaranteed income pilot programs around the country. There's just lots of grassroots organizing around the role of cash. And I like to think of myself, frankly, as an abolitionist in terms of poverty. Like, we can abolish absolute poverty, and we can have a whole debate about how you measure it, and are there positive measures of well-being, for instance. But this is the moment for us to really push the envelope. And I might add one last thing, and we have to be much more inclusive than we were 100 years ago during the New Deal, as Ann laid out all that history. So everybody means everybody. So yes, I-10 filers, immigrants, Black people, yes, poor and working class white folks, like everybody means everybody, but our approach, and I love what Ann said, is when you center Blackness and think about particularly Black women as the miner's canary, to borrow from Lonnie Greer, of our democracy, then you get to a different place that's about building a multiracial alliance and coalition and power, frankly, that can really give us a 21st century, not just safety net, but frankly, social contract or social compact. We have to create new floors in this moment. And I think the energy is here, and I'm very excited about the moment in which we find ourselves.
Right, so let me just follow up really quickly, because there's new polling is finding that it's incredibly popular policy. So can you share a little bit with the audience what you're learning from the actual polling that sort of lays this out?
Yeah. So we have some exciting results from a national poll that demonstrates just how popular these tax credits are. And so this is from Data for Progress, which found that more than half of respondents, 55%, supported giving families $3,600 per child under 6, $3,000 per child between 6 and 17. And then an even higher percentage, so about 6 out of 10 respondents, supported distributing the refunds on a monthly basis instead of waiting one time a year when families file their taxes. So that's just some key data points. But Chrissy, you know I'm obsessed about diapers. Like I think about diapers all the time because I have a 7-month-old baby girl. We change a lot of diapers. That's like daddy duty. I change all the diapers in my house. So lots of diapers. And I say that to say, like, not woe is me, but like so many other parents with infants, I know the cost of diapers adds up. It's pricey, right? It's roughly 22 cents to 60 cents per diaper. If you think of like 5 to 8 diapers a day, that's about $2 a day, roughly. And if you're one of the millions of Americans struggling to make ends meet, especially in the economic crisis in which we all find ourselves, you can't pay for diapers with SNAP. You can't pay for diapers with WIC or TANF to do a little alphabet soup on our existing social programs. But with the child tax credit, you can, right? Because what we know is it's been expanded to roughly $8.50 per day for each child under 17, or roughly $10 per day for each child under 6. That's diaper money. That's money to put food on the table. That's money to support healthy kids. So it's a really, I think of this as a breakthrough moment in terms of providing a real existing 21st century safety net in the richest democracy in the history of the world, when all the other rich democracies are way in advance of us on this question.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Dorian, because last week when I was with Ann and some of your partners from Community Change, when we were discussing this matter, Ann brought up a really powerful point about it's not just about the money to buy the diapers. It's also the money to decrease that stress about thinking about the diapers, about thinking about all the things that $8 has to do, and really allowing a mother or a parent to have some sense of joy, right? And to be focused and present, because you're not focused just about the money, hoping that your child doesn't need more than 6 diapers a day, But Ann and Dorian, I want to sort of bring both of you in here before we wrap. Dorian, what are we going to hear about these expansions of the CTC and the EITC from opponents? And I'd love for you to weigh in on this as well, since you've written about the welfare queen narrative. Because as you alluded to, Dorian, this type of progressive politics is not going to just miraculously happen. All this work from organizers and activists from across the country, we know that the GOP isn't going to just let it happen and, this is a great idea. Let's actually give working people money as instead of our wealthy friends and the tax cuts that we're accustomed to giving them. So what backlash should we be preparing for, and what's the narrative that we need to combat when people come at us doing this work?
I'll say something quick in 30 seconds because Ann has written and thought about this for much longer than I have, but we're going to see the revival of welfare queen, I'm sure. Of that trope, that racist and sexist trope that'll be weaponized against us. We're going to hear about deficits. Oh, we can't afford this, but where were you in 2017 with those Trump tax cuts that benefited the top 1%? Oh, and by the way, every single Republican tax cut before that. Where were you? Wow, the Tea Party, where are you? The silence is deafening, but I think they're coming. They're coming for us, so get ready. And I think the real fraud to worry about are people like Trump, who game the system and don't pay taxes, the 1% who should be audited for fraud. The money is there if we were to redirect our values and priorities. So that's my 2 cents, but Ann knows much more about this than I do.
Great, and so what should we be on guard, and as we hear about these expansions of the CTC and the EITC, what should we be thinking about from our opponents?
It's going to be all about disincentives to work. We're going to hear it more and more. And underneath those narratives, they're going to be steeped with sexist and racist narratives underneath, right? There's already been this sense that somehow, that there's this disincentive to work. So let's look at really the reality of what's happening with work. And the Center on Budget has done this analysis to really show that 1 in 7 households are working, 40 hours and plus an average about 52 hours a week. right? So they're already working hard. And also think about, working moms. 27% of mothers, especially low-income mothers with children under 12, are working evening or irregular shifts. Americans are working harder than ever, right? But we're going to hear these narratives around those who don't want to work. We're going to be hearing more about disincentives to work, even though we're seeing evidence that that's not the case, right? We've seen that too, even with some of the cash experiments like Seed in Stockton, right? That was not at all a disincentive. In fact, people were able to do things, work more, or go back to school, right? So we're gonna see a lot about work, and we've really got to counter those narratives with the real lived experience, especially of women, right? I don't think you can talk to anyone, friends, family, and not hear how incredibly difficult it has been to homeschool, to take care of kids, to go to a job where sometimes you're not being kept safe and have the fear that you're not going to be able to provide for your family. So we've got to push out this work on the ground. Love to hear from those folks who are moving this on the ground in different states to say that we've got to counter these narratives. We're going to see them. They're going to be coming up very, very soon.
Thank you. And so, Dorian, I just want you to roll out the next steps and information about all this campaign. So the progressive and the popular. So what are you in Community Change and your partners doing to make all this a reality?
Yeah, thank you, Chrissy, for that nice setup. So listen, all around the country, community groups are mobilizing, are organizing to keep these tax credits in place, meeting with congressional leaders, making the case in the local press to join our campaign and support making the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, CTC or EITC, to make those permanent. Text CARE, C-A-R-E, text CARE to 40649. CARE to 40649. So you can sign our petition, stay in touch with us. On May 17th, that's the new tax day for this year, some grassroots community organizations are going to join us to deliver some apple pies to district congressional office, thanking our champions and members of Congress for what they've already done and asking them to bake these credits into future budgets. Get it? So apple pies, please bake these credits into future budgets. Yes. We're serious about this and we're gonna have some fun. And then Chrissy and Ann on Juneteenth and on July 4th, two holidays that are about the long history of this country and the promise as well. We're gonna be having barbecues. We're gonna just be out because we're in this moment of opening up, and we're gonna be talking to folks, friends, family members, cousins, everybody about what these credits mean for our families. And we'll be inviting congressional staff to listen into some of these conversations. So we have a whole from Father's Day to Juneteenth to July 4th. We're gonna be active, we're gonna be visible. You're gonna see a lot of things. And so we encourage you to join us, follow us on social media, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, sign the petition and join this fight with us. And back to you, Dr. Greer.
Can you give us your social media handle really quickly?
At Community Change Action, and I'm blanking on all the. If you go to Instagram and put in Community Change Action, follow us there. On TikTok, on everything, on Facebook, you will see us. We're very visible. And make sure you text. Okay. 40649. The word CARE.
Okay, fantastic. I want to thank you, Dorian, and Community Change Action for all of the work that you do, not just around this issue, but so many issues that mean so much to families across the country. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Senator Brown, and I especially want to thank the Economic Security Project Action for putting all this together along with the Grio and Community Change. Have a wonderful, wonderful sort of beginning of summer. Stay safe, and thank you all for joining us today.